Hey there, everybody. Welcome to another episode of Webcomics Confidential. I'm Brad Geiger, and today we're going to talk about independent comics in general. Not only webcomics, but all independent comics. The broader scope. People who are doing independent comics in print. People who are doing digital comics, e-comics, stuff like that. Because there's been a lot of stuff going on a wider scope, and also just some stuff that happened to me over the last couple of days that all kind of brought this to mind and made me think that maybe it's something worth having a little deeper discussion on. It all started last weekend. I went to a party. My wife insists that I get out of the house every now and again. And one of the guys there, the guy that was throwing the party, he took me down to his man cave, and he was showing me his long boxes and all this kind of stuff. And he brought up the recent kerfuffle about the debate over whether Marvel's diversity push has resulted in a decrease in their profits and their circulation. And I said, I don't know whether you could make a strong argument for that or not, but he immediately pivoted towards the fact that Marvel is indeed and DC are experiencing much lower circulation than they did, let's say, 10 years ago, and that means the death of comic shops. And he said to me, "What are you going to do when comic shops are gone?" And I said, "What do you mean?" He says, "Well, the death of comic shops," he says, "the thing that you indie artists don't realize is that when, you all seem to be very thrilled that Marvel and DC aren't doing well," which I don't think was an accurate portrayal of my attitude, at least. You guys all seem so happy when Marvel and DC are doing bad, but when they do bad, you do bad, because where are you going to sell your comics? Where are you going to sell your graphic novels? And I just kind of looked at him like, are you being serious with me right now? No, I listen, I don't want to see my local comic shop go down the tubes any more than I want to see any American business person suffer. I want them all to do well, especially small business people. Having been doing comics as a small business for several years, I have a soft spot in my heart for mom and pop restaurants, locally owned comic shops, all that stuff. I don't want to see any of those people suffer, because I know how hard it is to do this thing. But a comic shop going out of business doesn't mean an entire big deal to in my opinion, to your standard independent comic artist. We've got so many options open to us, and to be fair, the sales that we get through distribution to retail outlets really is the last kind of line of defense. It's one of our smaller retail streams. Crowdfunding, certainly one of the largest, Kickstarter and Patreon. And in terms of book sales, Kickstarter is, in my experience, number one by far. And selling personally, selling through my website when I used to do comic conventions before that bottomed out, that was another strong revenue stream. Distribution, I distribute all of my books through Diamond Distribution, and there's only really, for me, one reason that I do that, and that is not comic shops, and it's not any brick and mortar retail store. It's because having my book through a formal distributor puts me into Amazon in such a way that I don't look like a third-party vendor. Okay? And that is important because people, I think, on Amazon do tend to shy away from the third-party vendors. But when your book is right up there like any other book that they're going to get, and it's not presented as a third-party vendor, then I think it affects sales in a positive way. Also, if that ever stopped being the case, I would be the first person to look into one of the other programs that Amazon has for selling your stuff, and they're launching. They've got a couple of ways that you can put your stuff out on Amazon. There's one that they launched not too long ago that bears some looking into, but that is not that's not where the big fish are. That's something that you do because you can do it once. You can send them a couple hundred books, hopefully, through your distributor, and let that crank away. And hopefully, by 6 months or a year, you're sending them another batch. And that's just good business to have that revenue stream out there. But it's by no means where my business is built. And like I said, I don't want to see comic shops go out of business any more than I want to see any other business person suffer. But comic shops are not the cornerstone of an independent cartoonist's business, in my opinion. Then he segued into this, which also touched on independent comics. And we talked about, the changes and this and that. And he says, I grew up, and he was about my age. He goes, I grew up reading Spider-Man and Batman in the 60s and the 70s. And he goes, those were such great comics because they were fun. They were amazing comics. There was great storytelling, great art. But at the heart of it, it was fun. It was something that was enjoyable to read. And it wasn't necessarily, this grim and gritty that we've seen over the past several decades here. And he says, why can't comics be like that anymore? And I said, comics are like that. There are tons of comics like that. The problem is you're not reading them because they don't have Spider-Man and Batman in them. There's tons of great comics written with a lightheartedness, a sense of humor, a joyfulness that is truly fantastic to experience. But they're not being done by Spider-Man and Batman artists. They're not being done by Marvel and DC necessarily. And they don't have Spider-Man and Batman in them. And I said, you should read. I said, it doesn't take that much to go out and find some of this stuff. If you really are saying that you're yearning for the days of that kind of freewheeling comic book, if you're really that upset about it, which I don't think, I think this is just people saying, why can't today be like the good old days? And that's kind of useless. But if you're really that torn up about all of this, it's not that hard to go out and look for some of this stuff. And there are lots of places to find it. There are lots of places to be exposed to this stuff. And he says, nah, you know what? He goes, it's just not the same. And here's the kicker. Here's what I held back from you. This guy's an independent cartoonist. This guy does, along with a friend, an indie comic book. And they're doing it. I don't know that it's got a web presence. I think they're trying to do it like it was 1985. They're printing floppies, trying to get them into comic book stores and so on and so forth. But he was an independent cartoonist. He was an independent comics creator, and he does like a superhero type title. And he is the epitome of the reason that his comic is not doing as well as he would hope it would, because we all kind of have this weird nostalgia for the John Romita Spider-Man and the Neil Adams Batman, and those things aren't coming back. And there are lots of great properties out there that kind of draw from the same well or have that same kind of reading experience, except you've got to be open to the fact that you're going to learn some new characters, be exposed to somebody in spandex that isn't necessarily a white male. and I'm telling you, if you allow yourself to think outside of that particular box that you may have been in, you might expose yourself to some really great stuff. So the question becomes, take this guy out of the equation. How do we as independent creators get over that hump? Because I think this one person, I know I'm extrapolating it to something very big, but I really, having done comic conventions, haven't been around for a little while, I don't think I'm making an improper conclusion when I say that this guy's attitude is the comics reading public in general. This is what we as indies have to get past. How do we do that? I don't know the answer to that. In fact, I'd like to open that up to you guys and see what you think. I do have a few thoughts. I always have a few thoughts. I do have a few thoughts on that. I think number one, and I've been trying to do this myself, and I'm telling you, you guys, the payoff on this is so good. It not only does it feel good, but you find that it is a reciprocal thing. It is so powerful. But as much as we have trained ourselves to be self-promoters, I've tried to be a promoter of other people's work, even if it's just retweeting a sketch that they've put up and say, hey, I think this is pretty cool. And certainly retweeting and sharing on Facebook things like Kickstarters and stuff like that. But just in general, being a positive voice and saying, sharing with the people that follow me, hey, look at this. I think this person's really cool. We are so obsessive about promoting ourselves that we forget that that's not necessarily what our followers are looking for us every day. Remember the 3 C's. That one C that we're all falling down on the job on is curation, retweeting and sharing stuff that we didn't necessarily create. We're so obsessed about our own thing. What you don't realize is this is a very Zen kind of activity, because the more of that you put out into the world, and I can tell you that I've experienced this, the more of that you put out into the world, the more it comes back to you. All the promotion that I'm putting out for other people comes back to me tenfold, because people like when you promote them. We're all kind of very similar in this respect, in that we're looking for a certain amount of verification. What's the word I'm looking for? A certain amount of, hey, you're doing a good job. Validation is what I'm trying to say. We're looking for validation as artists, particularly. To have somebody retweet you, I don't care if that person has 14 followers or 14,000 followers. Well, okay, I kind of care if they have 14,000 followers, but you know what I mean. I don't care necessarily just how big of a followership this person has. That validation that you get from somebody kind of giving you a pat on the back and giving you an attaboy or an attagirl, that's real good. And those people I'm seeing remember me, and so every now and again I'll see a familiar face retweeting something that I've put out there. Especially I'm talking to you folks who have been doing this for a long time, and you do have maybe a couple thousand organic reach on your social media. You guys lead by example. The more you do this, and I mean try to do it on a daily basis, the more you amplify other artists' work by retweeting and sharing it. Not liking. Likes are worthless. Likes are it's empty air. Same thing with on Twitter, Facebook, all that stuff. Just hitting the heart button doesn't really mean anything. Sharing, retweeting, reblogging, that stuff has value. And that's the stuff that those of us who have been doing this for a long time, we need to lead by example and do more of, okay? And that means following more people than you might be following right now. So you're exposed to that stuff. Sometimes we get a little insular in who we choose to follow. Open yourself up to some of that stuff. I think that's a great way of leading by example. Also, being, I love sharing personal stories on the web, but I always my main goal is to try to keep it positive. I think there, especially right now, there is so much negativity on social media, and I'm not going to argue that it shouldn't be the case, but there's so much out there that's downright depressing, that your voice being one of positive and sharing positive stories and sharing your excitement for your love of comics and cartooning, I think that's going to stand out. I think that's something that people are going to appreciate. And that's something that I absolutely think that we should be doing more of, sharing more of our personal excitement about independent comics and some of our personal stories. I've done this a couple times, and it never fails to get a really big and very positive reaction. I just usually give it a one-word lead in, and then it's an image. And the lead in is usually along the lines of "I got better." And then I post something that I did when I was a kid. I've got all this stuff back there in one of those bookshelves. I was a little bit of a hoarder when it came to my notebooks and sketchbooks and stuff like that. And I've got stuff I did in high school, pre-high school. Back then in Bad Axe, Michigan, we called it junior high. There's no such thing as middle school, intermediate school. I saved all of that stuff, and it's all horrible. But I think another really strong thing that we need to do, and again, I guess my mind right now is on people who have been doing this for maybe 10 years or so on the web. We need to be cultivating that next group of young artists. And part of that is dispelling this notion, dispelling this myth that our art and our writing has always been the way it is right now. It's valuable to share your horrible work that you did when you were a kid, because that's where we all started. And it's so easy. You know that whole saying about you on social media, you're sharing your behind the scenes with somebody else's highlight reel. It's so easy to look at somebody else and just assume that they've always drawn beautifully and they've always written in a compelling way. We all know that's not true. We all started really, really stinking at what we do, and doing it still because there was something in it that scratched an itch for us, or it fed a desire. It was something that we found to be rewarding. And that's the only way you get good at something. Nobody starts out good at this. There are some people that had a natural knack for it. Certainly, they started maybe further ahead than other people or further behind. But that only gets you so far, and then the rest is doing terrible, terrible stuff until you finally get better. My stuff that I do now is way better than the stuff that I did 10 years ago and 20 years ago, and it's nowhere near as good as the stuff that I hope to be doing in another 10 years. This is something that we're always on a journey, we're always on a climb, and I think we need to be sharing that with the next crop of independent cartoonists. You got to realize when you're out there talking on social media, you are being listened to, and what you say is important, and what you're putting out there is important. And I think we need to do a better job of cultivating that next crop of young artists. But in terms of getting over that hump that independent comics have, I don't know what more you can do other than continually putting that stuff out there, sharing your joy of other good independent comics that are being done, because we all need as much help getting over the noise that is out there. Especially, there's no way we're going to compare to the ability that Marvel Comics has to promote a Spider-Man comic, or DC Comics can put behind a Superman or a Batman comic. There's no way we can compete. So it becomes all the more important that we all stick together and support each other. And I think we could all kind of be doing a better job, me included. I think we could all be doing a better job of supporting each other. And it's not okay to say, I wish, comics could be like they were back then, and then not support those comics that are being done that way because they don't have Spider-Man in them. I think we need to loosen up our thinking on that and be loud about that. I think that, to be honest with you, I think that's the conversation that we should be having right now. If you don't like what you see in Marvel and DC, fear not. There are tons of other creators who are very, very interested in having your eyeballs and getting your attention for a little bit. That's my thought on independent comics. Tell me, what am I missing? Because the thing that I come back to all the time is that we are truly creative people. And we are the people that will always come up with the innovation and the clever ways of getting business things done. How do you think we can do a better job of promoting independent comics? How can we as independent comics artists and writers, how can we help each other? How can we help ourselves? How can we do a better job of efficiently doing our business? Hit me up in the comments of webcomics.com. I'm going to be really interested to hearing what you have to say. Once again, this is Webcomics Confidential. I'm Brad Geiger, and we'll see you next time.